The Amazing Race is one of my favorite reality competition shows of all time. My family would gather on the TV and watch it ever since I was a kid, and it's a show that is still calming and relaxing and fun to watch even now as an adult. So I think it's about time that I get to a ranking video on this show. Now, to be clear, I am only ranking the US version of The Amazing Race. No Amazing Race Canada, Asia, or any other version. Additionally, this is going to be a mostly spoiler-free ranking of all 38 seasons. I'm going to mention the notable teams of the season, but I won't explicitly state who wins. The loose criteria I have for ranking the seasons are cast, challenges, drama, route, and outcome. Cast is pretty straightforward. Are the teams fun and interesting to watch on TV? Challenges list the different roadblocks and detours that teams have to complete in order to finish the legs. Drama includes how interesting and compelling certain interactions between different teams were during the race. Route consists of all the countries and locations visited during the season, and this really doesn't matter to me as much as it does to a lot of die-hard Amazing Race fans. Lastly, the outcome also heavily impacts the ranking, but I won't explicitly get into all the nitty-gritty details. Also, I'm going to be showing off the DVD covers for each season, and starting with season 32, they switch up the formats a little. So I did a little editing magic to make 7 custom covers, and they probably look really bad with the low pixel quality. Okay, I tried my best, just bear with it. But let's not waste any further time here, let's get on with the ranking. For the most part, The Amazing Race is one of those shows where there's not many unanimous thoughts on different seasons. So I think it's very telling that one of the most universally hated seasons is The Amazing Race 8 Family Edition. And I'll give credit where it's due, it's a fun idea, but it just had horrible execution. If you watch The Amazing Race because you like seeing people travel across the globe, then this is not the season for you, as they only go around the USA and some island territories. But I think it's the cast here that is really flawed. You have a lot of teams that are either really forgettable or just straight up annoying and awful to watch. I think that's due to the fact that they have 4 people on each team instead of just 2, and the 40-person cast is very difficult to edit here. This is also a season where they decided to cast kids on certain families, which again is a fun idea, but the balancing issues here are way too big to overlook. A lot of the top performing teams here are either made up of strictly adults or families with children in their late teens. I mean, one look at the Gagan family, and I'm pretty sure you could tell who's doing the majority of the work here. Going to specific teams, I thought that the Paolo family was kind of fun to watch because of all their bickering. The aforementioned Gagans were rootable only just because of their young kids, and then the Weaver family just was straight up awful to watch start to finish. Whoever decided to cast these people and then make them run a race to relive their trauma has gotta be in top 10 weirdest production decisions ever. Speaking of production decisions, the weird format here really makes The Amazing Race 8 not feel like The Amazing Race at all. The majority of the episodes are just spent with teams driving around to the next location and doing really easy challenges. If we're gonna focus on travel, at least show them experiencing culture shock, or going on different flights, or something else but just passing cars on the highway. I think people should watch this season just to see how different it is from the rest of the show, and then you're good without watching it again. It is really bad. My next least favorite season is The Amazing Race 6. A thing you're gonna find as we go down this list is that I really kinda don't care for the older seasons that much. A lot of The Amazing Race fans will defend these seasons saying that it focused on travel and everyday people going around the world, and yeah, that's the whole point of the show, but the editing in these older seasons is awful. Compared to the seasons that I grew up with, there are so many unnecessary moments shown in these older seasons that really just pad out the runtime. If there's an older season I do like, it's either because they have interesting challenges or go to really cool locations, and surprisingly enough, The Amazing Race 6 does both of those. So, this is where you're asking, what's the problem with The Amazing Race 6? Well, this has probably the worst cast in the history of the show. There's like 1, maybe 2 likable teams out of all 11. I found Gus and Hira and Lena and Christy to have pretty fun relationships, but Freddie and Kendra, Adam and Rebecca, and Jonathan and Victoria just make this season really uncomfortable to watch. This goes to show that the cast is really what'll make or break an Amazing Race season. Even if you go to really beautiful locations like Iceland, Senegal, and Sri Lanka, if you have a bad cast, this season is not going to be worth watching. Not to mention, this season has the infamous hay bale roadblock, which is just really bad challenge design and makes for one of the most, sad and depressing challenges to watch. For as bad as this season is, I think it does still show promise for race design for future seasons, especially because this is the first season to introduce the rule that team members must have an equal number of roadblocks. But would I recommend this season to anyone? Definitely not. Another season that I really don't feel like is worth a watch nowadays is The Amazing Race 4, and that's because it's just boring start to finish. I could really only tell you the names of the top 5 teams here, and I only liked one of them, which was John and Al. Again, there were a couple of challenges I liked during this season, and they end up going to South Korea really close to the North Korean border, which is actually really interesting to watch. There's not much this season that's outright bad, like in The Amazing Race 6 and 8, but I can barely tell you anything that happens on this season. The season just fails at all of my criteria. If you want to see the contestants compete in cool challenges, there are better seasons to watch. If you want to see interesting drama between the contestants, there are better seasons to watch. And if you want a great cast of diverse personalities, there are way better seasons to watch. Now onto a very recent season, we have The Amazing Race 36. Now this is the first season on the list that I will mention that was heavily impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, and the effects of that are pretty clear to see. And that's because all of the different countries they visit are solely in South America. This creates a clear lack of diversity in not only the locations, but the challenges as well. A big strength of the newer seasons, in my opinion, are that they have much cooler challenges, but this season really falls short. A lot of the detour options had either a challenge that was much easier or had much less production design than the other. I also felt that the cast was just very meh, with no real standouts. Rod and Letitia were kind of fun, Ricky and Cesar, despite how good they are at the race, were pretty boring. And Angie and Danny were mostly fun, but they do feel pretty repetitive in their confessionals. Overall, it's just a really predictable and forgettable season start to finish, and the 90-minute episodes really don't help. The Amazing Race 32, another season that is pretty unanimously hated among the Amazing Race fans. Although, I've gotta say, I definitely don't dislike it as much as other people. This is a season that mainly suffers from another pretty boring cast. However, it's not near as bad as Amazing Race 4 or 6. Hung and Chi and Caitlin and Haley were both two likable teams, but the rest of the cast came off as really unlikable at times. And that's where the main criticism of this season comes into play, that it is dominated by an alliance start to finish. Like seasons of Big Brother and Survivor where an alliance dominates start to finish, it is good gameplay, but it doesn't make for the greatest TV. However, where I will defend this season is that I actually love the challenges here. They brought back one of my favorite challenges from a previous season, and they managed to make the challenges blend into the locations perfectly. One of the best examples of that is that they go to a movie studio in Kazakhstan and have one of the coolest detours I have ever seen in the show. The season also seemed to try a lot of new things. Some of those twists were fun, like they had the Mega Leg in India with 2 detours and 2 roadblocks. However, some of the other twists came off as boring. For instance, who can tell me what the city sprint is? Yeah, exactly. And the yield hourglasses were a fun idea, but it really doesn't work because of the previously mentioned alliance. If I rewatch this season, I might be tempted to place it slightly lower, but as of right now, I think it is slightly better than people like to give it credit for. Alright, now we're getting on to my first real hot take on the list. Don't worry, there's a lot more to come. But to go on with what we have at hand, I really didn't care for The Amazing Race 10. This is a season that I see towards the top of many people's rankings, and I really don't understand why. I mean, I enjoyed the first 3, maybe 4 episodes of this season, but after that, my enjoyment really tanked. And that's because the second half of this season is such a slog to get through. Just like Amazing Race 32, there's an alliance that takes up a big majority of this season's screen time, yet I never get as much flack as I hear for season 32. Maybe it's because the teams in this alliance hurts themselves with their own strategy, but in its own way, it's kind of less interesting to watch than seeing someone dominate. But I can still see some potential positives on why a lot of people like this season. There's a lot of different countries visited this season. They even go to Madagascar, which is pretty cool. I also think the twists they introduced this season are pretty cool, but the lake design actively works against them. The stripped of all possessions penalty for non-eliminations is replaced with marked for elimination, which I think is one of the better non-elimination penalties. But you'll see that the stakes of that are kind of stripped away when there's fast forwards and intersections being thrown about. Speaking of which, the intersection is also a good idea, but I feel like the first few seasons never really use it to its full potential. This cast is pretty meh as well. Dustin and Candace are of course the real standouts here, they're one of my favorite teams in the show. And then all of the other teams are just boring or way too mean-spirited. While I would watch this season over some of the others I've mentioned, I definitely think it is highly overrated. And now we move on to the very first season of the show, The Amazing Race 1. Because it literally started the show, I have to give it some credit, but does it still hold up compared to newer seasons? Not really. I get that reality TV was still very new in the 2000s, but the editing here is just really weird. There are a lot of scenes that just have no music, and there are hardly any on-screen updates to show where the teams are. And the lack of these placement updates make the first few episodes of this season really confusing to watch. The challenges this season are also insanely easy, even for old season standards. The challenges are basically walk over here and grab the thing, there you go. However, to make up for these flaws, the cast here is pretty fun. There are a lot of good standouts here. Frank and Margarita, Joe and Bill, Kevin and Drew, Nancy and Emily, they're all standouts that made a great template for future seasons. I feel like the root and drama are also fine for the first season of the show, but again, this season does drag at times, especially towards the end. As the first season, they placed non-elimination legs, but it started this trend of cramming the non-elimination legs until the end, which isn't really that exciting to watch. Again, I give it credit because it's the first ever season of the show, but when compared to other seasons, it just doesn't hold up that well. The Amazing Race 33. I'm thankful that we even got this season. I mean, this season is the COVID season. It started filming before the pandemic and had to halt production due to, the global pandemic. And because of that, it's a season I can't blame for its problems, but I'm disappointed knowing we could have had so much more. Upon reassessment, this cast is top tier. Everyone here is fun to watch or has a cool story. Kim and Penn, Ryan and Dusty, and Raquel and Kayla are great examples of that. Heck, even teams like Caro and Ray, Connie and Sam, and Anthony and Spencer had dynamics that I thought were really entertaining to watch. Unfortunately, due to the COVID-19 pandemic after Leg 3, we're left with a shell of its former self. For one, not every team comes back, and the show has to work around that. Plus, the country only ends up visiting countries in Europe, which is pretty disappointing. Again, the producers tried to work around their circumstances, and we still get some interesting challenges, but the rest of the season feels really stretched out. Especially because they had to cram non-eliminations into the second half of the season. Although, I will say that the last few episodes of this season are pretty fun to watch, and I do like the outcome. I definitely think this could be one of my favorites if it wasn't for COVID-19, but again, I'm just glad they managed to salvage what was left. Another hot take, though I've heard some people are with me on this one, I didn't really care for The Amazing Race 3 either. But to be fair, this might place a little higher on a rewatch, as I remember a lot of crazy moments this season. I liked the cast during introductions, but as the season went on, I found them to be pretty hit or miss. Ken and Gerard and Aaron and Ariane were fun, but I remember thinking the other teams were either boring or straight up unlikable at times. I'm also not a big fan of how this season ends. I thought it was pretty unsatisfying. And despite some iconic moments, I thought the leg design here was really weak. If I remember correctly, half of the leg would take place in one country, and then the rest of it would come down to a flight and maybe a challenge on the way to the pit stop. Editing here was also subpar. I found that the ending was paced really slowly, and I found myself getting bored near the end. If I were to rewatch the seasons, this one would be higher on my priority list, but as it stands, it's gonna place right here. And at number 29, we have The Amazing Race 29, which I will mention is the last season in the bad tier. And from what I can understand from the fanbase, this is kind of a love it or hate it season. Some people place this season in their top 5, but as you can tell, I am not a big fan. It has an interesting concept of all of the teams being made up of strangers who met at the starting line. I think that could have been really interesting to see all the dynamics, but unfortunately I just found myself getting annoyed. A lot of people like the drama that this produces, but it ends up just feeling so forced. When the teammates just spend half of the episodes yelling at each other, it leaves me not caring about any of them. Well, that's not entirely true. Becca and Floyd are great. They're probably one of my favorite teams in the history of the show. Matt and Redmond make good TV as well, but I can't say I got any entertainment out of any of the other teams. Challenges are alright, the route is perfectly average, and we get some iconic moments too, just like Amazing Race 3. Unfortunately, the outcome is one of my least favorites in the history of the show, so that's obviously going to have a big hinder on the season. I get why some people like this season, but it took me 2 tries to get through this one, and I think that should tell you enough. Starting off our next tier is The Amazing Race 19, and I think this season is the embodiment of meh. This season never has any moments I would consider outright bad, I just thought it was kind of average and lackluster. This one is almost like if ChatGPT generated a season of The Amazing Race. It's not the bad kind of boring like The Amazing Race 4 was, but there is still seasons that do everything else better. The cast is definitely better than The Amazing Race 4 and even some other ones, but even then, there's not really any main standouts. Bill and Kathy were kind of fun, same with Amani and Marcus, but then everyone else here is pretty forgettable. But I will say that this season flows pretty well, there's really not any dull points. There are also some really fun moments, including one in episode 2 that's one of my first memories of watching The Amazing Race. Unfortunately, there's never really a moment where I was truly invested in this one, so that's why it's going to place right here on the list. Similarly, The Amazing Race 27 is another season that's paced pretty well with some fun stories, but again, I'm just not that invested in it. The cast overall is fine, but I think the main faces of this season are Justin and Diana. When I think of all these superfan archetypes, they've got to be one of the first ones that pops into my head. And I think they definitely drive the narrative for a lot of this season. But that could also be because of the crazy amount of screen time they got. I think this season is fine at a lot of the other criteria too, especially locations and challenges. But there's no moment during this season where the teams actually self-drive. I didn't notice it until someone pointed it out to me after I watched this season, but it definitely explains why it feels like something was missing here. Not to mention, the final few episodes really carry the season. That's not to say that the other episodes are bad, but the legs in the final 5 and final 4 are really fun to watch. Like I said, I was mostly indifferent to this one. Not bad, but not one I'm dying to rewatch. Alright, guess we're due for another hot take. I'm not nearly as big of a fan of The Amazing Race 7 as a lot of other people are. This is another season where I feel like there's really one standout team, and that would be Rob and Amber. I'm a big Survivor fan, so I loved them this season, but even if you don't watch Survivor, they are definitely going to leave an impression on you. There are a few other fun teams to watch here. Meredith and Gretchen are another one of my favorite teams, and Uchenna and Joyce are fine, but they're not as high on my team ranking as they would be for some other people. The rest of the cast is okay, but I think I prefer the ensemble of 27 even if I like a bit more standout teams from this season. For the most part, I feel like this season is fairly middle of the road and a little bland at times, especially towards the end, it really starts to drag. However, this is a season that is carried by some truly insane TV. There is a double-length episode that very well could be one of my favorite episodes in the entire show. There's even a moment that would probably make my top 10 Amazing Race moments in episode 3 via Rob and Amber. The highs that this season reaches are truly incredible, and it's why I could see myself moving it a little higher on a rewatch. But I could also see some of my complaints still being present, so I think number 26 is a fine spot on this list for now. The Amazing Race 11 is the first All-Stars season, and I've gotta admit, it's not half bad. I think that the teams they brought back are either real standouts or strange choices, but luckily, everyone that makes it far ended up in my favorites category. We also get some cool locations this season, with the lakes in Malaysia and Guam being some of my favorites. Unfortunately, the lake design as a whole this season was pretty strange. There's a moment in the middle of this season where a handful of teams get really far behind, and the lakes are structured in a way where there is practically no chance for them to catch up. And I think it's this predictability that brings the season down. But I will say that this is another one like Season 27 where the ending actually keeps up the momentum. We get some fun drama with the yield, and there is some really cool detours. And on the other hand, another piece bringing this season down is the outcome. The team that wins is the duo in the Final Four that I cared the least about, but they're not actively bad or dislikable winners. But if you like the first 10 seasons of this show, I think you'll definitely like this season, as you're gonna see some familiar faces get to race again. The Amazing Race 15 starts off the good tier, seasons that are just solid to watch. But what is less than solid about this season is the cast. It's another hit or miss group. I mean, we get the Globetrotters, probably in my top 5 favorite teams. Brian and Erica also had a dynamic that I thought was really nice to watch over the course of the season. But then everyone else here either bickers a lot or is just a little too bland. But just like Season 7, we get some unforgettable TV moments. There's a stretch in the middle of the season that is amazing. The second leg in Dubai and the first leg in the Netherlands are probably two of my favorite episodes of the show. I think some other trouble comes from the fact that the beginning of this season is a little hard to get into, and the end of the season definitely slows down a bit, but it's not near as slow as some of the other seasons. Because of the pacing issues, I could maybe see this falling down the list on a rewatch, but I think this season is still a pretty fun time. The Amazing Race 14 is a season that has an iconic cast. I mean, seriously, we have some really great teams. Jamie and Cara, Margie and Luke, Keisha and Jen, Tammy and Victor, Mel and Mike. It's one of the best casts in the history of the show, and they make the first half of the season amazing. However, everything starting from the final 6 is honestly a little boring. I think that's because the route is admittedly pretty bad. A lot of the time in the second half of the season is spent in Thailand and China. Which, don't get me wrong, I love when the show goes to those countries, but it gets a little stale when almost the entire second half of the season takes place there. But again, even though the pacing slows down this season, the drama definitely does not. The teams have great interactions start to finish, and episode 1 has one of the most iconic moments in the show's history. This season isn't as great as I remember, but it still is enough to make the good tier. The Amazing Race 38, the most recent season of the show as of recording this video, and it's a little divisive so far. It's not necessarily love it or hate it, but it's definitely hate it or just kind of think it's alright. And, as I'm sure you've gathered, I think it's alright. The cast this season is strictly limited to Big Brother alumni and their loved ones. As a Big Brother superfan, I love this cast, but I understand why Amazing Race fans don't. Additionally, being subtitled Amazing Race European Adventure, this season only takes place in Europe, and that's pretty disappointing. But despite the lackluster route, I still thought it was fun to watch at times. A lot of people thought that the challenges were really easy, and while I could see that with a few roadblocks, I thought the detours were pretty balanced. But the biggest strength of this season is the dynamics between the cast. It can be a little hard to follow if you're not a die-hard Big Brother fan, but I think the main points of tension are well explained this season. And because of that, we get some U-turns that I thought were really fun to watch. Another big gripe that people have with this season is that it gets very predictable towards the end, and I definitely see that as a fan of this season, but still, I think the strengths are enough to keep it pretty fun to watch. The Amazing Race 30 is a season I liked a lot more than I thought I would. I started watching this season a long time ago, and it wasn't until I decided I wanted to do this ranking video that I decided to finish this season. And upon rewatching episode 1, I remembered why I didn't want to finish this season. The editing in the first few episodes is real bad, arguably worse than some of the older seasons. If there's any episodes that need to be 90 minutes, it would have been the first 2 episodes of this season. Everything is incredibly rushed, the audience barely gets an idea of what's going on. Luckily, these pacing issues are fixed around the 3rd episode. My other big complaint with this season is it introduces the head-to-head, which is a twist I really don't like. Even as a fan of the challenges, I feel like the legs shouldn't be solely dependent on whether you can complete a challenge or not. But even then, I thought the head-to-head was used surprisingly well, and there's never any outcome that left me disappointed. But the other twist I was really not a big fan of was the partner swap twist. I won't get into spoilery details, but it really just takes away the importance of a whole leg of the race. The cast was pretty fun as it got going as well, with Henry and Evan and Alex and Connor being some of my new favorite teams. Now, this was another season where the team that won was my least favorite in the Final Four, but again, like the Amazing Race All-Stars, I don't think they were horrible. Yeah, overall, it's just a season with a fun route, fun challenges, and a really fun last few episodes. The Amazing Race 25 is a recent season that people are pretty partial to, but I just thought it was average. We get another fun cast, which obviously elevates things. I ended up liking Kim and Allie, Misty and Jim, and Brooke and Robbie a lot more than I thought I would. We also get some alright drama throughout the season, and a really fun Final 5 leg. It's another one of my favorite episodes in the show. But unfortunately, I feel like this is the inverse of the Amazing Race 30, where the start of the season is really fun, but then it kinda sputters out at the end. The start of the season has some really fun detours and outcomes, and then the end of the season gets a little predictable and boring. I'm also not a big fan of the outcome here, nothing against the team that won, but they just didn't receive a good edit from the show. Overall, I think this is a pretty solid, average season of the race. Alright, I definitely think my placement of the Amazing Race 23 this high on the list shows that I prefer the middle era of seasons. I think if you liked the older seasons of the show, this season would be a lot lower on your list. The cast as a whole is one of the weaker ones in the entire series, but to make up for that, Leo and Jamal and Tim and Marie absolutely carry this season. They are 2 of the best casting choices in the history of the show. The challenges were honestly not the strongest either. I think this is actually a season that had a lot easier challenges than Amazing Race 38. So, what makes up for those weaknesses? The drama and strategy this season. There is so much interesting gameplay, and the outcomes are some of the craziest in any season. While I don't love a lot about this season, there's not really anything I dislike other than a certain team's gameplay. And you know what? Come to think of it, this is like the more recent version of the Amazing Race 7. Like that season, it's carried by a couple of teams, but it has a lot of interesting drama and outcomes to make up for it. But unlike Season 7, the Amazing Race 23 is consistent all the way through. And I think that's a factor that places it this high on the list. Alright, hear me out. I know the Amazing Race 5 is the #1 season for a lot of people, and I can definitely see why. I think another reason why this might fall at number 18 is because it has been a bit since I've seen this season all the way through. But anyways, let's get on to the positives. This is definitely one of the best casts ever assembled for the show. I mean, we get Sharla and Myrna, Colin and Christy, Linda and Karen, and even Allison and Donnie, with Allison being from Big Brother. The first half of this season is amazing. It's drama to the max, and there's some decently fun challenges and travel. I think the outcome of this season is also pretty satisfying, so what's wrong with it? Like a lot of the older seasons, there is a lot of non-eliminations crammed at the end, and besides 1 or 2 insanely iconic moments, there's nothing quite as good as the first half. I also felt that even though we got a lot of drama this season, it did get a little annoying when it was travel related. I mean, I feel like for the first half of this season, a good 10 minutes of every episode are being dedicated to arguing in an airport. But again, a lot of the fans like that, which is why I get why it's a lot of people's favorite season. I could see this season placing higher on a rewatch, but for now, I think I'm gonna place it just inside my top 20. Alright, let's keep taking in the takes while they're hot. I actually like The Amazing Race 24, aka All-Stars 2. I mean, it's certainly nowhere near as boring as a certain other All-Stars 2. Starting with the negatives this time, the cast here is admittedly pretty strange. 4 out of the 11 teams brought back are from a single season of the show, and while I actually loved the cast that season, I felt like 2 of these teams really didn't need to come back. We also get a team that is thrown together last minute on the fly, and they hadn't even participated on the same season together, and it's just really unfortunate. Lastly, 3 teams are brought back for a 3rd time, and while I love those 3 teams, 2 of them really don't contribute anything this season. People also say that the challenges this season are a little lame, and while I can see that at times, I thought they were really fun for the most part. Speaking of fun, the first half of this season was chaotic and entertaining. I thought the leg design was pretty fair and interesting, and when it wasn't, we got some engaging drama to make up for it. There's also a lot of competitiveness this season, which makes sense because it is an all-star season. Another complaint people have with this season is the route. They double up and stay in a lot of countries here, and while I can get why that's disappointing for a lot of fans, I think the locations this season are beautiful. I mean, we get China, Malaysia, Sri Lanka, Italy, it's all great. So if you're okay with back-to-back legs in the same countries, I think you'll get some entertainment out of this one. Again, it's not amazing, it does slow down in the second half just like The Amazing Race 5, but I think it is definitely overhated. The Amazing Race 2 is a huge improvement over the first season. Overall, the cast is weaker than Season 1, but the drama that they produce is still as good. Tara and Will drive the narrative for a lot of this season, Gary and Dave I thought were fun goofballs, and Oswald and Danny are one of my all-time favorite duos. But the biggest strength of this season is that the editing is so much better than the first season. I think there's still a bit of uniqueness in the pacing and confessionals, but it doesn't feel as slow and disorganized as Season 1. And because of that, I'm actually able to enjoy the uniqueness here instead of getting confused by it. I also think that out of the first 4 seasons where there's a fast forward on every leg, this season has the best usage of that. I think it's another season that is consistent in quality for a lot of the episodes, and not to mention it has by far the best finish of any season. The Amazing Race 34, a recent season that I think could use another rewatch to really solidify the rankings, but I do remember it being solid. The route this season isn't the greatest because it took place in the wake of COVID-19, but the first-time visit to Jordan really makes up for it. I think we also get a very underrated cast here with Emily and Molly, Glenda and Lumumba, Derek and Claire, Linton and Sharik, and Luis and Michelle. Even teams like Quentin and Maddie, who didn't really get the best edit, I thought were fun at times. Now, the challenges don't stick out in my mind as much as they do for other seasons, but as I was skimming through the list of detours and roadblocks, I remembered some pretty fun moments. As far as travel and drama-wise, there's really only 1 or 2 moments I remember being crazy and iconic, but like Seasons 2 and 23, it's a solid watch start to finish. Alright, we've finally reached the favorites tier, which is the largest tier on the list. And at number 14 is The Amazing Race 16. Going into this season, I heard that it was just kind of okay, but I left being pleasantly surprised. The cast here is fun, the edit mainly centers around Jet and Cord, and I appreciate that as they are one of my favorite teams ever. But we get some fun rivalries that play out with Joe and Heidi, Louie and Michael, Carol and Brandy, and Brent and Katie. The challenges are probably the weakest part of the season. They were fairly easy and simple for the most part, but the route and definitely the drama make up for that. There's also a decently satisfying outcome, which ties the bow perfectly on a very underrated season. The Amazing Race 37 has the largest cast in the show thus far, with 14 teams. But then again, they eliminate 2 at the end of the first episode with the fork in the road twist, so is it really that monumental? Who's to say? Speaking of the fork in the road, this season is the season of surprises, meaning that there's a twist every leg. And while not all of these are new twists, they do bring back the fast forward and U-turn. The twists that are new feel kind of forced, like the driver's seat and especially valet roulette. Oh boy. But even then, I feel like this season is a lot of fun to watch, especially with the cast. The people who make it far are really entertaining and bring the drama, love them or hate them. We also get Carson and Jack and Han and Holden, which are two of my favorite teams in recent seasons. Alyssa and Josiah were also a really fun team to watch. I mean, Josiah commented on one of my TikToks, shout out Josiah, I love you Josiah! And even though there weren't many detours this season, the episodes that did feature them had some really cool choices and results. It's an entertaining season all the way through, with a great ending and exhilarating final few legs. The Amazing Race 26 is another big love it or hate it season, and in this case, I love it. And that's because it is a hot mess start to finish. There's an overarching theme of dating and love this season. 6 of the couples know each other beforehand, and 5 of them are blind dates that are just meeting each other at the starting line. And the editors try to push this romantic and love subplot the whole season, but this cast is just so strange. It's like the chaotic cast of Survivor Gabon mixed with the weird overarching theme of Survivor Blood vs. Water. Now, I think both the blind date teams and the currently dating teams both bring entertainment values in their own way. Jelani and Jenny and Haley and Blair were the blind date teams that stood out to me the most, while the teams with previous relationships of Mike and Rochelle and Matt and Ashley also managed to leave a good impression on me. And for the Big Brother fans out there, this is the origin of Jeff and Jackie, who are one of the blind date teams this season. You also get some really fun challenges again, even if it takes a few legs for them to get that way. But this is a season with a really interesting route going to Namibia, Monaco, and Peru, and it has another one of my favorite episodes of the show with the leg in Germany. If you're looking for a really serious season where everyone cares about the race, you will hate this season. But if you're looking for some fun and chaotic TV, you are going to love this one. The Amazing Race 28 is another gimmicky season. This time the cast is full of social media personalities. Some fans dislike this because it strays away from casting ordinary people, and I get that, but I enjoyed watching this cast, especially since I recognized them. Upon rewatching this season, I recognized Darius and Cameron, Zach and Rachel, Bernie and Ashley, Kurt and Brody, and at the time this season was airing, my sister was obsessed with Tyler and Corey. And while not all of these teams seemed like they were there to play at times, the teams that were in the game were some excellent casting choices. We get another set of some really fun challenges as well, especially with the detours. And I'm another big fan of this route. We get some great locations: Colombia, Switzerland, France, Armenia, even Georgia. I think the editors also have a lot of fun with this season. There's a lot of great foot races and finishes. But the biggest thing that drags this one down is the outcome. The winners are some of my least favorites in the show, and I feel like a lot of other teams would have been better winners. But as a whole, I still feel like it's a season that is pretty underrated amongst the fan base. Alright, we're starting off the top 10, and now we're getting back to basics with The Amazing Race 17. This is another fan favorite season, and going into this one, I honestly knew nothing about it other than the winners. Well, the winners and an insanely iconic moment in episode 1. But I'm glad to say that after watching this season, I understand the hype. The cast here is fun. Brooke and Claire are one of my new favorite teams, Michael and Kevin were fun, and Gary and Mallory are always great to watch. Unfortunately, I think the boot order isn't the greatest. I've always felt that when talking about reality TV, boot order is kind of stupid to complain about because you're really just criticizing people who were bad at the game. And I think that's especially the case with The Amazing Race. But this is a time where I understand because a lot of the teams that I was excited to watch went out earlier than I expected. But to make up for that, we get another fun route: Ghana, Oman, Norway, and another visit to South Korea where we get really close to the North Korean border. I think as long as you're fine seeing some characters go out earlier than you expected, it's one of the most solid and consistent seasons of the show. There's nothing that is insanely memorable past the first episode, but there's never any dull moments that drag this season down. The Amazing Race 22 is the season that got me hooked on the show as a kid. I mean, this is a great and underrated cast. Joey and Megan are the first team I remember being invested in, and Dave and Connor also have a crazy debut. The route this season is also one of my favorites. I could probably tell you every Detour combo because of how many times I've watched these episodes. And the reason why this season still places this high is because every team that gets eliminated goes out in a crazy way or has a complete meltdown. Seriously. Everyone. I wish I can get into explaining why, but I promised I wouldn't spoil, so you're just gonna have to watch this one for yourself. However, even though nostalgically this season is one of my favorites, I have to look at this realistically, and the outcome brings this one down a lot. It's another season where I wish a lot of certain teams made it further, and the winners aren't bad, but they aren't great either. But again, this season is one that I feel like a lot of the fans sleep on. It is really crazy and unexpected in hindsight. As of the time of this video, The Amazing Race 35 is gonna place at number 8 on my list, but I could see that changing in time. I feel like I may be a little bit biased on this one because this season got me through several monotonous bus rides during speech and debate tournaments in high school, but I remember this season being pretty fun. I don't think there was any moments that really wowed me, but it was refreshing to get a season that visited Asia and used the U-turn again. But we have a really fun cast here as well. We have Joel and Garrett, Liam and Jeremy, Steve and Annalie, and Rob and Corey. And I think this results in a season with one of my favorite final threes, as I would have been satisfied with any of the 3 teams finishing first. The Detours are fine, there's one real standout one towards the end of the season, and we also get 2 really fun dancing roadblocks. And these dance challenges don't feel forced like in a certain other season. Amazing Race 38. Like I said, this might drop a little lower on a rewatch, but I remember being pretty satisfied with this one. The Amazing Race 20 is another season that produced some of my first memories of the show, and it's a season I only had vivid memories of going into. And I was definitely not expecting to love it as much as I did. We get a devious and competitive cast this season, but I enjoy that. Brendan and Rachel are definitely divisive among fans, Art and JJ I thought were a fun team this season, Vanessa and Ralph were hilarious, and Bopper and Mark are just too lovable for this cast. This season also has not one, but 2 of my all-time favorite episodes of the show, and that is mainly because of the great pairing of detours and roadblocks throughout. I also love the route this season. We get Paraguay, Azerbaijan, and Tanzania. These are awesome locations. It's a season that is chaotic and memorable all the way through and never lets up. I do wish I liked the outcome a little more, but I could see this season moving up on a rewatch. The Amazing Race 13 was a season that I feel like no one really talks about. I barely knew any of the cast going in because no one really talks about any iconic moments this season. So you can imagine my surprise when this quickly became one of my favorites upon a first watch. In my opinion, this is another incredibly underrated cast. I mean, we get Ken and Tina, Tony and Dallas, Nick and Star, and of course, Andrew and Dan. I think everyone from the final 7 onwards makes for some great TV. In hindsight, I think The Amazing Race 13 is like a better version of The Amazing Race 22. It's another season where a lot of teams take themselves out in crazy ways, and the route and challenges are consistently fun to watch. However, unlike The Amazing Race 22, I think the outcome we get here is a lot better. I also have to bring up a fun fact about this season. It's the season that stopped teams from mingling between pit stops, and there's a ridiculous moment that will show you why. This season may not be the most competitive and engaging to watch, but it definitely brings the chaos, and as you can see by the other seasons in my favorites tier, I love a chaotic season. Alright, when fans glaze the older seasons of the show, The Amazing Race 9 is the standard I thought they would be talking about. And I think that's crazy because while people like this season, they definitely don't view it as high as others, and I'm just wondering why! This season has arguably the best cast in the history of the show. Eric and Jeremy, Fran and Barry, Ray and Yolanda, Wanda and Desiree, BJ and Tyler. Every team starting from the final 9 is peak. The final 9! Yeah, if you couldn't tell, I love this cast, and we get one of my favorite winners in the history of the show. And considering this was an older season, we get some really fun detours and roadblocks. The use of the yield results in some really fun moments, and the route, oh my god, the route! Germany, Oman, Australia, Thailand, and Japan, these are some awesome locations. The Amazing Race 9 also never drags like a lot of older seasons, and we get a lot of fun moments and great TV. I think it says a lot that I love this season this much, and it's only number 5 on this list. It may have taken a while to hit the truly amazing seasons, but The Amazing Race puts the amazing in its name when it gets good. The Amazing Race 31 was the season that got me back into the show. I stopped watching The Amazing Race about halfway through season 29, and when I heard that this season got announced, I decided to give the show another try. And I'm glad I did, because this reality showdown is one for the ages. All of the Amazing Race teams they brought back were really fun on their original seasons, and were great choices. The Survivor teams are probably the weakest part of the cast, but even then, they are still really fun to watch. And considering I was really getting into Big Brother at the time this season started, I loved seeing Nicole and Victor here. The route is also top tier all the way through, including but not limited to visits to Laos and Uganda. The challenges are amazing, detours especially, but the pairings of detours and roadblocks during the Vietnam and Dubai legs are just absolutely phenomenal. And considering there's teams from Survivor and Big Brother this season, it makes a lot of sense that this season is filled to the brim with drama. It's an entertaining season start to finish with one of my favorite winners in the show. It's a season that reminded me why I love The Amazing Race so much. The Amazing Race 12 is one of the best starter seasons of the show for someone who has never seen a single season of the race before. Twist-wise, it introduces some of the most important mechanics of the show. We get the speed bump penalty for non-eliminations, and the holy grail, the U-turn. The best twist in the history of the show, at least in my not-so-humble opinion. But the format is just one strength of this season. We get another one of the best casts in the show. We've got Kent and Vixen, TK and Rachel, and Ron and Christina, just to name a few. This is another great route, and we got some pretty varied countries here: Burkina Faso, Lithuania, and Japan. And starting the transition to the middle era of the show, the challenges start to get really interesting this season. They're not the most complex in the world, but they don't need to be. It's just exciting enough to keep you watching. There's truly something for everyone this season. Fun travel, interesting drama, great winners, and there's never too much of one thing. Alright, word of warning, the teams on this cover that I'm about to show did not win their original seasons, so either don't look at the screen or skip to this timestamp if you do not want to be spoiled. The Amazing Race 18, aka Unfinished Business, is the first season to be in HD, and oh boy, they picked an amazing season to start with. This is basically the Survivor second chance of The Amazing Race, and it is really effective. I mean, all of the teams they bring back are some of my favorites, except for maybe the first boots. I also love the narrative this season of the teams trying to make up for their past mistakes. I feel like the redemption aspect really makes this season competitive and engaging. The route is solid overall. There's no country that is really unique to this season, but we get countries like Australia, China, and Switzerland, which provide some really nice views. This season is fun start to finish with some very iconic moments. It's one of a lot of people's favorite seasons for a good reason. Not to mention that this is the first season I distinctly remember watching on TV. I think technically my first season was either 16 or 17, but like I said, I was a toddler and I don't remember any of those. But my favorite season of the show to date is The Amazing Race 21. It is truly one of a kind, because according to a lot of my criteria, this season really shouldn't be my favorite. Route-wise, it's not that great. It only visits 2 continents, Asia and Europe. Challenge-wise, they're alright. The challenges are either really forgettable or decently fun. But getting a little better once again is the cast. Overall, it's not that great, but every team that makes it far really drives the narrative. Natalie and Nadia are by far my favorites here. It's fun to see their antics before they got on Survivor. But I also love watching James and James and Josh and Brent. However, if you want drama with a satisfying outcome, this is the season to watch. In my opinion, the winners this season provide the best finish in the history of the show. The 2-episode stretch in Russia is quite possibly a high that the show might not ever reach again. It has one of the only good uses of a cliffhanger and some of the most surprising and shocking events the show has ever seen. And after those 2 episodes, the momentum just does not stop. It is so good. Like, it's so good to the fact I'm convinced someone scripted out this whole season just because none of it feels real. Like, I know it's reality TV and this stuff would be pretty hard to write, so I know it actually all happened, but it's just so unbelievable. And even though I gush about the second half of this season and how good it is, the first half is enjoyable in its own chaotic way. I think the tone is a little bit different in the first half, but again, it is just so surprising and entertaining start to finish. The Amazing Race 21 is my favorite season now, and it's definitely going to stay that way unless another amazing season manages to top it. So, that's my ranking of all the Amazing Race seasons. I hope for people who haven't seen the show or want to watch more seasons, this list manages to be a little helpful. Also, make sure to leave your comments down below. Just try and be respectful. I know a lot of you are gonna disagree, but listen, we all have our opinions about this show. And, as always, thanks for watching.